When we think about ancient history, the spotlight usually shines on kings, warriors, and emperors. But what about the women? Hidden in dusty scrolls, forgotten ruins, and overlooked stories are powerful truths about women who shaped the ancient world. From warrior mothers in Sparta, to pharaohs of Egypt, to priestesses who wrote humanity's first literature, women were not just bystanders in history. They were leaders, innovators, and creators of culture. In this video, we'll uncover 10 curious facts about women in ancient civilizations you never learned in school. These stories will challenge what you thought you knew about history, and remind us that women's influence has always been at the heart of civilization. So, let's travel back in time, across continents and centuries, to meet the women whose voices still echo through history. Women of Sparta, warriors in their own right. When we think of Sparta, the first images that come to mind are men in bronze armor, charging into battle. But here's what most history classes never taught us. Spartan women were extraordinary in their own right. Unlike women in Athens, who were largely confined to their homes, Spartan women lived boldly. They trained their bodies with running, wrestling, and even spear throwing, exercises that prepared them for strength and endurance. Why? Because the Spartans believed strong women gave birth to strong warriors. But their role went far beyond motherhood. Spartan women could own land, inherit wealth, and manage estates. In fact, by some accounts, women in Sparta controlled nearly 40% of all property, something unheard of in most ancient societies. They also had a voice. Spartan women were known to speak freely, even boldly, to men. Plutarch recorded sayings from Spartan mothers sending their sons to war with the famous command, "Return with your shield, or on it." Imagine the pride and iron will it took to say that. So while Spartan men fought battles abroad, Spartan women defended their society at home, physically, economically, and culturally. They weren't just bystanders of history, they were pillars of it. In many ways, the women of Sparta were the hidden warriors of their civilization. Their strength, independence, and influence remind us that power in the ancient world didn't always come from a sword. It could also come from the resilience and courage of women. Ancient Egypt, women could be pharaohs. When you picture a pharaoh, you probably imagine a man in a golden headdress, ruling with divine power. But here's something school often skips. Women in ancient Egypt could also rise to the highest throne in the land. One of the most remarkable examples is Hatshepsut. In the 15th century BCE, she declared herself pharaoh and ruled for over 20 years. To be taken seriously, she often wore the traditional false beard of a king, yet her reign was one of peace, prosperity, and monumental building projects. Temples she commissioned still stand today as proof of her power. And then there's Cleopatra VII, the last active ruler of Egypt before Rome took control. Cleopatra was not only a queen but a skilled diplomat, strategist, and linguist. She spoke multiple languages and forged alliances with Rome's most powerful men, not through seduction, as legend exaggerates, but through sheer intelligence and political mastery. What made Egypt unique was that women had more rights compared to other civilizations. They could own property, run businesses, and even initiate divorce. Unlike in Greece or Rome, where women were second-class citizens, Egyptian women were legally recognized as individuals in their own right. So, in a world where leadership was almost always reserved for men, ancient Egypt stood out. It gave us women rulers who proved that political brilliance and strength weren't tied to gender. These pharaohs left a legacy that reminds us power isn't just written in stone, it can also be worn with a crown. Sumerian priestesses, the first power brokers. Long before the rise of Greece or Rome, the world's first cities emerged in Mesopotamia, ancient Sumer. And at the very heart of these early civilizations stood powerful women, the priestesses. These women weren't just caretakers of temples. They were power brokers, bridging the gap between the gods and the people. One of the most famous was Enheduanna, daughter of King Sargon of Akkad. She wasn't only a high priestess, She's also recognized as the world's first known author. Over 4,000 years ago, she wrote hymns and poems to the goddess Inanna, texts that still survive on clay tablets. Imagine, human literature itself was pioneered by a woman. High-ranking priestesses often managed vast temple estates, controlling land, workers, and resources. In a society where political and religious power were intertwined, these women wielded enormous influence. They could dictate rituals, advise rulers, and even shape policies through their spiritual authority. While Sumerian men fought wars or governed city-states, priestesses ensured that society's divine connection remained strong. Their role was so critical that some cities regarded their high priestess as almost equal to a queen. What makes this especially fascinating is that in most later civilizations, women's voices were silenced. But in Sumer, the birthplace of writing, law, and urban life, women were not only present, they were leading. So next time we think about the cradle of civilization, remember this. At the very beginning of human history, women weren't hidden in the shadows. They were writing humanity's first stories and guiding its first great cities. Women in ancient China, the Silk Queens. When we think of ancient China, we often picture mighty emperors and towering dynasties. But behind one of the greatest treasures of the ancient world, silk, stood women. Legend credits Empress Lezu, the wife of the Yellow Emperor, with discovering silk around 2700 BCE. The story goes that while drinking tea beneath a mulberry tree, a cocoon fell into her cup. As she pulled it out, the delicate thread unraveled, and silk was born. Whether legend or truth, one fact is clear. Women became the guardians of silk making for centuries. Silk production was no simple task. It required tending mulberry trees, raising silkworms, harvesting cocoons, and carefully spinning the threads. This delicate, painstaking process was mastered almost entirely by women. They kept the secret so well that for thousands of years, China was the only place in the world where silk was made. Silk wasn't just a fabric. It was a symbol of status, wealth, and even diplomacy. The famous Silk Road that connected China to Europe wouldn't have existed without the skill and labor of women in silk workshops. Their work literally wove together cultures across continents. While men ruled the courts and armies, women in ancient China shaped the empire's global influence with a single shimmering thread. They were the silent engineers of one of history's most important industries, turning tiny cocoons into treasures that empires fought to control. So, the next time you see silk, remember, it's not just fabric. It's the legacy of women whose hands changed the course of history. The Amazons, myth or reality? Greek mythology tells us about a mysterious tribe of warrior women called the Amazons, fearless riders, skilled archers, and fighters who lived beyond the borders of the known world. For centuries, many believed they were nothing more than legend, but modern archaeology suggests there may be truth behind the myth. The Greeks described Amazons as women who lived without men, raising their daughters to fight and sending their sons away. Tales of their battles with heroes like Hercules and Achilles painted them as both dangerous and fascinating. To the Greeks, the idea of women who rivaled men in combat was shocking, and perhaps threatening. But then came the discoveries. Archaeologists excavating burial mounds on the Eurasian steppes, lands once roamed by nomadic tribes, found the remains of women buried with weapons, bows, arrows, spears, even battle injuries. These women belonged to the Scythians, a horse-riding people whose way of life likely inspired the Amazon legends. It turns out, in some Scythian communities, women did fight alongside men. They hunted, rode, and waged war. To outsiders like the Greeks, who rarely saw women outside domestic roles, these warrior women must have seemed like a different species entirely. So, were the Amazons real? Maybe not exactly as Greek poets imagined, but the spirit of their story came from real women who defied expectations and rode into battle. In the end, the Amazons remind us of something powerful. Legends often hold kernels of truth. And sometimes, those truths tell us that women were not just bystanders in history, they were warriors shaping it. Roman women, masters of influence behind the scenes. When we think of ancient Rome, we picture emperors, senators, and generals, the men who ruled the empire. But behind the marble walls of palaces, Roman women shaped history in quieter yet equally powerful ways. Unlike in Sparta or Egypt, Roman women were not allowed to hold political office or vote. On paper, they had little official power, but in practice, many women influenced the very heartbeat of Rome. Take Livia Drusilla, the wife of Emperor Augustus. She was known for her sharp political mind, guiding Augustus' decisions and securing her son Tiberius' path to the throne. Roman historians often described her as the empire's hidden strategist. Then there's Agrippina the Younger, mother of Emperor Nero. Bold and ambitious, she maneuvered through palace politics with ruthless precision, even appearing on Roman coins beside her son, an almost unthinkable honor for a woman. Beyond politics, Roman women also held sway in family and society. Wealthy matrons could own property, manage estates, and sponsor public works. Even ordinary women influenced their households, guiding marriages, alliances, and business ties. What makes their story fascinating is how they mastered the art of indirect power. While men debated in the Senate, women used wit, persuasion, and family connections to shape outcomes. Some Romans even feared their influence, accusing them of being too clever, too persuasive, too dangerous. So while their names might not appear on official decrees, the fingerprints of Roman women are all over history. They remind us that sometimes the most powerful leaders aren't the ones in front of the crowd, but the ones pulling the strings behind the scenes. The matriarchs of the Indus Valley. The Indus Valley Civilization, one of the world's earliest urban societies, flourished over 4,000 years ago in what is now India and Pakistan. Its cities were marvels of planning, with paved streets, drainage systems, and bustling marketplaces. Yet one of its greatest mysteries is the role women may have played in this sophisticated society. Archaeologists have uncovered countless terracotta figurines of women, often adorned with jewelry or shown in poses of reverence. Many scholars believe these were representations of goddesses, suggesting that women, or the feminine principle, held a central place in religion and daily life. Unlike many ancient civilizations where men dominated, the Indus Valley may have been more egalitarian. There's no evidence of massive palaces or kingly monuments. Instead, power seems to have been distributed more evenly. Some historians speculate that women could have held authority within households, communities, and perhaps even governance. Daily life also hints at women's influence. They likely played key roles in managing trade, agriculture, and crafts such as bead making and textiles. And with goddess worship woven into culture, women's spiritual significance was undeniable. Of course, because the Indus script remains undeciphered, we may never know the full truth. But the evidence suggests that this civilization valued balance, harmony, and perhaps even equality between genders. The matriarchs of the Indus Valley remind us that long before written history, women may have been pillars of one of humanity's greatest ancient cultures, powerful not through conquest, but through creation, spirituality, and community. Viking women, not just shield maidens. When most people think of Viking women, they picture the legendary shield maidens, fierce warriors charging into battle with sword and axe. And while there's truth to those stories, the reality is even more fascinating. Viking women were far more than fighters. They were the backbone of Norse society. In the absence of their husbands, who often sailed for trade or war, women managed farms, livestock, and households. They were the guardians of wealth, holding keys as symbols of authority and controlling family property. In fact, Viking women had legal rights unusual for their time. They could own land, inherit property, and even divorce their husbands if the marriage failed. But some women did fight. Archaeologists discovered a burial in Birka, Sweden, where a high-ranking warrior was long assumed to be male, until DNA testing revealed she was female. Buried with weapons and battle gear, she was clearly a respected warrior, proving that at least some Viking women truly lived as shield maidens. Women also shaped Viking culture as storytellers, healers, and priestesses. Through Saya, a form of Norse magic, female shamans were believed to wield great spiritual power, guiding communities and even kings. So yes, Viking women could wield swords, but their real strength lay in their ability to rule households, manage wealth, and preserve the culture of their people. They weren't just companions to warriors, they were leaders in their own right. In the world of the Vikings, women were not only survivors, they were power keepers, protectors, and, at times, warriors of legend. Mayan and Aztec women, the keepers of knowledge. In the vibrant civilizations of the Maya and the Aztec, women were more than caretakers of the home. They were keepers of knowledge and guardians of tradition. Among the Maya, women served as skilled midwives, healers, and scribes. Some even became rulers, like Lady Six Sky, who led military campaigns and performed important rituals to sustain her city's power. Mayan women also worked in astronomy and calendrical systems, passing down sacred knowledge that guided farming, festivals, and even royal ceremonies. In the Aztec Empire, women played central roles in daily life and culture. They controlled the bustling markets of Tlatelolco, where thousands gathered to trade goods. Aztec women also trained as priestesses, singers, and teachers, keeping religious traditions alive. And perhaps most importantly, they were revered as the givers of life. Childbirth was considered so dangerous that it was likened to battle. Women who died giving birth were honored as fallen warriors, their spirits believed to accompany the sun on its journey. Both civilizations placed enormous value on women's work in weaving, cooking, and storytelling, not as simple tasks, but as essential contributions to community survival and identity. So, while Spanish chronicles often overlooked them, Mayan and Aztec women were far from silent. They were healers, rulers, educators, and cultural leaders, ensuring their civilizations thrived and their knowledge endured. In truth, they remind us that wisdom doesn't only come from kings and priests. Sometimes, it's woven quietly into the hands of women who shaped entire worlds. Women in ancient Japan, the shaman queens. In the early history of Japan, long before samurai and shoguns, women held remarkable power as spiritual leaders, often referred to as shaman queens. The most famous among them was Queen Himiko, who ruled during the 3rd century CE. According to Chinese records, Himiko was a mysterious leader chosen for her spiritual gifts. She rarely appeared in public, communicating instead through her brother, while she devoted herself to magic, rituals, and communion with the spirits. Yet despite her secluded lifestyle, she commanded the loyalty of her people and earned the respect of neighboring kingdoms. Her rule demonstrates something fascinating. In early Japan, political authority was often tied to spiritual power. Women, believed to possess stronger connections to the divine, could rise to the highest positions of leadership. Shaman queens like Himiko weren't just rulers, they were mediators between humans and the gods, securing harmony and prosperity for their people. Even after Himiko, women continued to play important roles in Shinto practices as miko, or shrine maidens. These women conducted rituals, dances, and divinations, shaping the religious life of Japan for centuries. While later eras would become more patriarchal, the story of Himiko and the shaman queens shows us that in Japan's earliest days, women's voices carried both political and sacred weight. Their influence reminds us that power isn't always measured in armies or swords. It can also lie in the unseen, in faith, and in the spiritual bond between people and their gods. From the warrior women of Sparta to the shaman queens of Japan, history is filled with stories of women who defied expectations. They farmed and fought, ruled and wrote, healed and inspired. Yet, too often, their stories were erased or overshadowed. But as we've seen, women weren't just in the background. They were builders of nations, keepers of knowledge, and guardians of culture. By remembering him, we don't just honor the past, we reshape the way we see the present. Because the truth is, women have always been central to the story of humanity. If you found this journey eye-opening, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more hidden histories. And let's keep uncovering the stories that deserve to be told.